This is a CNA podcast.
Hello and welcome to CNA Correspondent. This is the podcast where our network of correspondents shine a light on stories from wherever they are in the world, from groundbreaking events to up-and-coming trends. They're your eyes and ears around the globe, bringing you behind and beyond the headlines, examining issues, meeting people, and exploring places. On today's edition, a city in the loop of lockdowns.
COVID-19 outbreaks in China, they are taking a turn for the worse.
Well, China continues to reel as COVID cases spread, forcing more tough action across the country.
China has sent over 10,000 health workers from across the country to Shanghai. They'll help to carry out COVID-19 tests today for the city's 26 million residents.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has praised the country's COVID-0 strategy, even as Shanghai reported a new surge in infections to another record.
This is an ongoing and seemingly endless story of China's determination to carry out its dynamic zero strategy that demands each COVID-19 flare-up be contained as quickly as possible. Shanghai lifted a 2-month lockdown in June, but has registered double-digit daily cases in recent weeks, prompting rounds of repeated mass testing to identify infections so they can be quickly quarantined to prevent further spread. What's it like to live, work, and report on these ever-changing developments? We're joined by our Shanghai correspondent, Lo Min, to find out. Min, thanks so much for joining me. How are you? You've got to get us up to speed. You must be vaccinated, tested, got all your COVID apps and documents in place.
Yes, I am vaccinated with 2 Pfizer jabs, but unfortunately in China, I'm considered unvaccinated because China doesn't recognize these foreign vaccines. But besides that, I have all those apps in place. They're absolutely essential for living in China.
Oh, it does sound very complicated. How has it impacted how you, and not just you, but your team as well, how you do your job, getting out, moving around, meeting people, incredibly important in what you do?
Yes, so we need a COVID test that's taken within the last 72 hours, which means that we have to do the test, and it's a PCR test every 2 days because we need to factor in the 8 hours or so that it takes to generate the results. And without these negative results, it's impossible to go anywhere, including taking public transport. You have to scan it to enter the metro station, as well as public spaces like restaurants, malls, offices, and so on. So scheduling a PCR test into my daily schedule has been very important because if I miss it, it may mean I can no longer attend a meeting or go for a shoot or even enter my office.
Wow, that sounds incredibly onerous. I have to say, I've only had one PCR test in this entire time, and you're having them every 2 days. These are the horrible ones that go right deep into your nose, right?
Yes, nowadays they do it on our cheeks, and initially it's quite funny. I think they were all very diligent, so they're like digging really deep into your throat. But I think now there is this sense of COVID fatigue that sometimes you're just like sobbing, gently scraping the side of my cheeks, and it's not going so deep anymore.
So it's gotten a bit more tolerable as time has gone by.
Yeah.
And part of the routine as well. Shanghai is China's commercial hub. It's a city of hustle and bustle. How has it been coping with COVID-19, and what's sort of the general mood of people on the ground with the on-again, off-again lockdowns and endless rounds of testing?
Yeah, there is definitely a sense of COVID fatigue here, a sense that there is just no end in sight because after the lockdown was lifted, we keep hearing of more buildings getting into short lockdowns. My colleague, for instance, has just been informed by her neighborhood committee, that's the lowest level of government in Shanghai, to stock up on more food because there are residential blocks near her that are locked down for 7 days. So it's kind of like a game of roulette. You simply never know when it's going to hit, when it's your compound that's entering a lockdown because of a positive case or a close contact. So that's made traveling very difficult as well because if you come from a mid or high risk areas, then many other places within China will not want to receive you without additional quarantine or more testing.
So that must add to another layer of complexity then if you're sort of coordinating a team of like cameramen or producers and fixers as well. Like what happens if one of you is in an area that gets locked down and just can't get out to work on the story?
Yeah, so it's been quite difficult. One of my colleagues has been working from home for quite a while. She thinks that there is too much risk just taking public transport to go out. So she's been working from home. My cameraman and I have been out and about. We've had to just adjust our plans at the last minute sometimes. If we plan a trip, suddenly policy changes and then we have to go through either quarantine or additional hoops we have to jump through to travel. So we have to cancel some of our production trips and just make do with finding stories nearer to Shanghai.
Yeah, I can sort of hear the frustration coming through your voice at the moment. Do stay with us, Min Min. Next on CNA Correspondent, how the Omicron variant has changed things and the resilience and life hacks to make it through China's COVID-19 response.
Hi, I'm Stephen Chia, and I host the new season of our podcast, Heart of the Matter. Join me in getting right to the heart of the headlines as we speak with experts and newsmakers to delve deep into the most talked about news developments. Look out for our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. Hello, Min Min. Our Shanghai correspondent is still with us as we continue our chat about Shanghai's lockdowns. Now, it's fair to say that China's initial response to the pandemic of mass lockdowns and testing was successful. It limited the spread, which ultimately saved lives, particularly before vaccines became available. But the recent, more transmissible variant has changed things.
In the Omicron, the situation is quite different. The virus is so transmissible, so infectious that before you identify the virus has been circulating without any noticeable signs in the population. Example is Shanghai. Once you identify a few infected cases, actually the virus has been spreading in the entire population. So that's why the Shanghai suffers so heavily in terms of its lockdown and its screening effort in all sorts of public health approach.
That was Professor Alan Wu, Director for the Center for Public Health Research at Nanjing University. Now, Min Min, other countries are dealing with Omicron very differently compared to China. Here in Singapore, the days of lockdowns are seemingly behind us. Life is increasingly back to normal, albeit with face masks indoors. Now, I'm not trying to rub it in or anything, but how has Omicron changed how China is dealing with the pandemic in Shanghai?
I think China is pretty much dealing with the pandemic in a very similar way, but they have refined the approach to make it more precise. For instance, they found that people infected with the BA.5 variant are prone to infect other people within 3 days after a positive test. So that led them to shorten the quarantine time by about half, as there's no need to quarantine people for so long anymore. They also know that since the virus spreads more quickly, the authorities are, I would say, much more aggressive with mass testing in my experience. They are identifying infected people and positive cases and quarantining them very quickly. We're doing mass testing at an unprecedented rate. It's about 3 times a week for me where I live. So I must have done in all maybe over 100 tests by now. And it appears the government is just studying the virus and tweaking their strategy to target it.
Okay, so they're getting a bit more streamlined in their approach. And it's predominantly Omicron that is circulating around China?
Yes, it's predominantly Omicron.
Tell us more about some of the challenges that the government then is facing in actually managing a city of over 25 million people when it comes to the administration and the logistics of having to do all these tests and all these lockdowns.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think one of the biggest challenges it appears the government is facing is getting the elderly to be vaccinated, because Beijing recently tried to impose a vaccine mandate only to walk it back a couple of days later. And it seems like now they're using a combination of carrots and sticks to get the elderly vaccinated. This could mean sending them notices that they may lose their welfare benefits of rice and oil for their families if they fail to get immunized, or giving them coupons and vouchers for getting the shot. So if you look at the statistics, nearly 90% of the population is fully vaccinated, but only about half of those aged 80 or older are immunized. And if you look at the death toll in Shanghai, most of those who died from COVID-19 are those who are elderly and unvaccinated. So that's the first big challenge. The second one is really the recovery of the economy, because Shanghai experienced a lot of suffering during those 2 months of lockdown because it was so harsh. It broke down the entire supply chain, cut off people's access to food and essentials. So imagine organizing food delivery to 25 million people. It's a major logistical challenge. But now all of that is kind of over. The job now is to recover an economy that is badly hurt, especially for the small and medium businesses. Many of them could not survive 2 to 3 months with barely any income. So a lot of businesses are hurting. Even larger companies, many of them are looking at the situation in Shanghai and saying, look, we need to diversify and keep our supply chain resilient. We're considering whether it makes more sense to move our headquarters out of Shanghai now.
Yeah, a lot of concerns for the economy for sure. I just want to come back to what you're talking about, the elderly generation in Shanghai that are reluctant. Where's this hesitancy coming from? Is it a concern of their current health may not be able to see them through getting the vaccine, or they're just skeptical whether the vaccine works? Where's the hesitancy?
I've spoken to people about this, and so far the answers I'm getting seems to be first, the elderly usually comes with a lot of other underlying conditions, and perhaps their doctors advise them not to take it for fear of any side effects or aggravating their existing health conditions. The second thing, they might be a victim of China's success, because many of them tell me that they actually feel very safe, and they feel that as long as they avoid crowded areas, they wash their hands and wear their mask, there's no need for them to get vaccinated because they feel that they can take care of themselves by taking these precautions.
Oh, I can see how that gets a bit tricky then for the government to say that they're keeping everyone safe, and at the same time then please get vaccinated just to keep yourself safe as well.
Yeah.
For this then to have dragged on for more than 2.5 years now, there's a real need for resilience, isn't there? Especially for people that have to make a living and put food on the table.
Yeah, exactly. As I mentioned earlier, especially for business people, you need a real iron will to know that you are committed here for the very long run. Because I've met people who have pumped in millions of their own money or sold a house just to keep their business afloat. And for ordinary people living in Shanghai, you also do need that psychological resilience to be able to stay calm and unfazed no matter what is thrown at you, what new rules and policies are suddenly imposed, and you just have to keep on adapting.
And what are some of then the life hacks that residents and perhaps even yourself have sort of come up with or realized or used to get through this?
Well, I'm doing yoga every day if I can to stay sane.
Oh, for peace of mind, not just to keep your body moving, right?
Yeah. I don't know if there are any quick and easy life hacks, but I think the usual things, trying to stay connected with friends, do the things you love, give yourself time off and know that it's completely normal to be feeling out of sorts or in a slump because of the external environment you're in. And don't be so harsh on yourself. I think these are the things I tell myself sometimes.
Yeah, self-care and go easy on yourself. Definitely some good advice when times are going tough. I mean, it's been tough over there in Shanghai for the last 2+ years that this pandemic has been going on. And increasingly, as other countries are starting to open up, are the population there seeing what's happening in the rest of the world, countries opening up, people enjoying more freedom? So they're wondering when it's going to end for them and getting a bit envious that they're missing out?
Yeah, a lot of locals that I speak to tell me that they still somewhat support the zero COVID policy, or at least they understand why it's needed. There is a lot of dissatisfaction from the locals. My sense of it is that it comes from the fact that their essential survival were not guaranteed because food was not readily available during the lockdown. And if you look at the protests that happened, a lot of the protesting was more for food and more rations, not so much for the lifting of the lockdown. And I feel people are somewhat more tolerant towards the loss of freedom in exchange for safety and low spread of COVID-19, as long as their daily survival is guaranteed. But I also did speak to some people who told me that they wish that there are more choices for better vaccines. And by this, I think they mean the mRNA vaccines, which studies have shown are more effective than the inactivated vaccines that China produces. And they feel that this could be perhaps a reason why China needs such harsh measures. And they said they themselves would be more willing to take the vaccines if the mRNA were available.
That's a bigger question for China that we'll have to leave for another day. Thank you, Min Min. We really appreciate the work you're doing for us in Shanghai under these challenging circumstances that we've been talking about today.
Thank you, Steve. It was great speaking with you.
Now, before we go, the TV version of CNA Correspondent airs on CNA every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. You can watch the show anytime you like after it airs on cna.asia. Do like and subscribe to this podcast version that takes you behind the scenes with our correspondents. Thank you for listening. Our podcast team is made up of Daniel Lee, Crispina Robert, Clara Ong, and me, Steve Lai.